Robert Burns is the owner of Wilderness Ironworks, selling decorative and functional ironwork, pattern-welded rings, and, of course, knives. He's a masterful bladesmith. The photo on the show notes page will give you an idea of his skill. Hi, Robert, and thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Caleb.
So, what sort of blade do you specialize in?
I would like to think that I specialize in making more utilitarian pieces, but in recent times, about the past year or so, it's moved into the more higher end art knives. I do really love doing axes, though, as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was. There are a lot of makers that make tomahawks and things like that, but about 5 years or so ago, there was really maybe only a handful of people that were doing production runs of pack axes and felling axes and any sort of large axe like that. And that's originally what I actually kind of specialized in when I first started my business.
So, when did you start business?
As a business, I officially started, I believe, it's going on just about 5 years now. So that would be 2011 or so. I had kind of started my first semester of college and then decided that I wanted to go into blacksmithing full time. And so I dropped out at the beginning of the second semester to do that.
When you started your business, what are the really difficult challenges that you found?
Well, the most difficult challenges were actually just like knowing how to set up a business. The money was, of course, something that had to be worked on for buying equipment and things like that. But the biggest thing was like not knowing where to find insurance for blacksmiths and how to deal with return policies and like all the stupid stuff,
Right.
getting a tax number and stuff like that. So there was all that stuff that I didn't know anyone who could tell me how to do that. So that was probably the hardest thing, because the blacksmithing I had already been doing for a while. And so it was more the business side of things that was the tricky part.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So, when did you first start bladesmithing?
So I made my very first knife about 7 years ago. I had done a few other blacksmithing projects just a couple of years before then. So I was around, I think, 14 or so. I had just started high school when I first started doing anything with metalwork
Right.
and all of that.
Just a few days ago, I made my first forge weld, my first basic Damascus. So it's kind of tricky getting the basic materials together. So if you were teaching me to make Damascus again for the first time, what would you recommend doing? Like the overview, what sort of materials, what sort of flux, that sort of thing.
Sure. Well, so first of all, congratulations. That's very exciting.
Thank you.
That you did that. It's not an easy thing to learn how to do. The first thing I will say about any kind of forge welding is that it is the easiest and most tricky technique to learn in metalwork in general. At its core, it's just you get something to a certain temperature, you hit it, and it works. But it doesn't always work out that way. There's a lot of finesse and kind of getting to learn what material you're working with.
Right.
But as far as helping people get started with forge welding, the easiest thing to learn how to forge weld first is something to itself.
Right.
So if that was in knife making, if you took a high carbon steel and just practice welding it to itself, that's going to be the easiest technical weld you can do. But if you're looking for pattern welded steel, the easiest ones to put together are always going to be a 15N20 and a 1084. They're
Right,
both high carbon steels that are having this roughly the same heat treat, so they're not going to rip themselves apart. And as far as flux, there's a lot of debate on that. There's no one cure-all. You can do fluxless welding relatively easily, either in a coal forge or in a gas forge.
Yeah.
But most people starting out, can easily get a hold of a 20 mule team borax.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is very one that professional smiths use is anhydrous borax, which is virtually the same as the Mule Team
Mm-hmm.
borax. It's just had all the water boiled out of it, which actually, like, when you use Mule Team borax and it foams up, you can take that foam and then crush it down, and it's pretty
Oh,
similar
I
to
see.
anhydrous
Huh.
borax. Yeah, because the water's boiled out of it at that point when it's on the steel, so you can sometimes,
Oh,
if
I
you
see.
want to, but
Yeah, yeah.
it's just easier to order it. And there are all sorts of different magical mixes, and there's some fluxes for stainless that, can be really toxic. So the easiest one to just do for beginners is probably a 20 mule team.
Right.
That's probably the easiest to get a hold of, most common to use. It works fine, you know.
Huh. Okay, and what about basic patterns? Because I know that the more layers you have, the more, um, I suppose, chance of messing up you have, right?
Yeah, definitely. I wouldn't say as so much the layers. It's more about the orientation of your weld.
Mm-hmm.
If you are uh, just welding things on themselves, then the weld doesn't have as much stress on it as if you turn that weld 90 degrees
Right, right.
and then fold it like for a crushed W's pattern. Um, so the patterns I would recommend first off are the pretty standard ones, learning how to do a good ladder pattern,
Mm-hmm.
learning how to do a random pattern, learning how to do a twist pattern or maidenhair. All of those are, or a raindrop pattern too. Those are all really solid, good things to learn that will
Mm-hmm.
be really helpful later on.
Okay. And also, another thing that I'm personally interested is I've never actually done any torch welding.
Mhm.
So to get them together before forge welding, I'd have to use wire or just or like some sort of folding weld to do that. Any recommendations there?
Yeah, I didn't have a welder for a really long time. And so I would just take some 12 gauge mild steel wire and
Mm-hmm.
then wrap it up in that. Um, and that works perfectly fine. I mean, there's a lot of if you look at some Viking swords, at least ways that guys build them now, a lot of times they do something that they probably would have done in the past, which is to take a bar and make a collar around
Right.
it to join things together. And then you weld around that, and then you remove the collar because you don't want to weld the collar
Yeah, yeah,
to the
yeah.
piece. So the easiest one is just wire wrapping.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also make metal collars, and then of course later on in the process, just cutting and stacking is something that I still do now as opposed to cutting, just because it saves a lot of material. Like you're going to
Right.
lose a lot more material if you're folding to 1,000 layers and you're cutting
Right.
it apart each time. You're losing all that material. That's the width of the blade you're cutting with.
Right. And so when you're
So
losing
just
it, that's due to the scaling, right?
Well, you lose the scale in the forging process, but
Right.
then if you are cutting it up each time, you're also
Oh,
losing
yeah,
all.
yeah.
Whereas if you cut through over 50% while it's hot, you're not actually cutting that
Mm-hmm.
material, you're actually dragging it down
Right.
into it.
So you're just separating and squishing.
Right. So it's all still there. So you end up with more mass at the end. So if you're because that's one of the trickiest things probably to learn when you're first doing it is how much overmass to
Mm-hmm.
plan for the descaling and all the things that come with it. Because if you do a really complicated Damascus, you can lose up to 30% of the
Oh,
original
okay.
mass by the
Mm-hmm.
end of it. So that's, quite significant.
Right. So like if you're doing a custom project and then you get all the patterns done, you find out you've lost too much, then you have to start over.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Huh. Okay. And then also on the wrapping without welding, how do you get a handle on there, or just tongs?
Oh, sure. So an easy thing you can do for that is you can just leave a bar in the center
Mm-hmm.
that's slightly longer, and then you have
Okay.
something to hold on to.
Okay. And when I was browsing the bladesmith forum a while back, I saw the work in progress thread you did with the frame handle knife. Um, you want to tell us some of the progress in that and about that knife in general?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so that was my very first frame handle build. And I had a lot of help from Carl Anderson on it, which was just phenomenal of him.
Hmm.
And yeah, it was just I've been wanting to really step up my game
Right.
with complexity and everything recently. I'm planning to go for my journeyman smith test in the American Bladesmith Society over the next year or so. Um, so I just wanted to really try and push things as far as I can on each project. And so that was just kind of the goal for this. It coincides. I have a trade show that I do every year.
Hmm.
Um, and so I wanted to have a really nice centerpiece for it. Right now, it's actually, I sent it out last week to Caleb Royer to go get photographed.
Hmm.
And so he actually just sent that back, and we should have a professional picture of it sometime next week, which is pretty
Okay, I'm looking
exciting.
forward to that.
Yeah, me too.
So, what are the materials in that blade?
So that one, let's see. That one was just 1084 and 15 and 20.
Hmm.
Sometimes with some of my more complicated patterns, I'll use it as many as four different types of steel.
Hmm.
Um, Typically, they're all, of similar heat treat, but
Right.
on this one, I just did 1084 and 15 and 20. And then that was technically a mosaic pattern. So
Hmm.
basically, I started a billet of crushed W's and left it at 2 layers of crushed W's
Hmm.
and about like 13 layers wide. Because when you do crushed W's, you turn the billet
Yeah,
sideways and
yeah.
then you layer it that way. So it's kind of a weird layer count system
Hmm.
because it's anyway. And then I also did a jelly roll.
Yeah.
And then what I did was I tiled those together, drew them out into bars, and then did a Turkish twist, and then assembled that as a multi-bar, and then welded that together to get the material for the blade. So it ended
Okay.
up being a really cool version of a Turkish twist because of the really high layer count in the jelly rolls.
Hmm.
Because the jelly roll ends up once it's all done being like 200 layers or
Right, right.
more, in that little confined space. So it actually makes it almost look like kind of like an S ladder pattern, the way
Hmm.
everything joins together, which is kind of cool. And then all the handle fittings, the frame, the guard, the spacer, those are all made out of a like 100 layer twist Damascus.
Okay.
Um, but then instead of like leaving all of that to just be Damascus, I thought it would be too busy with all the craziness in the blade. So I heat blued them. So it's just running a torch over
Hmm.
it until it gets to be around 700 degrees, and then actually then hit it with a WD-40 while it's hot, and
Huh.
then because the oil is already in aerosol form,
Hmm.
kind of, it's
Yeah, yeah.
pretty close. When it hits that, it bakes on, and then it
Oh.
creates a high gloss surface that turns it more of a deep black. But then you can still see all the pattern inside of it. So it's kind of a neat effect.
Right.
You have to be up close to notice it. Otherwise, it just looks black. Um, but yeah, so that's what I did there. And then it has 6 hidden pins that are made of stainless steel that run through the frame and connect to the handle material. And then the handle material is it's fossilized mammoth ivory.
Hmm.
Uh, so I got that from Mark Knapp out of Alaska. And so that, he didn't say exactly how old it is, but it's at least 20,000 years old.
Right.
So it's an old material. And then that has leather spacers on either side. Just, a lot of guys don't do it. Some people don't like the look of it,
Hmm.
but the ivory is really susceptible to big humidity changes.
Yeah.
So anytime I have a material that is being joined in such a way, or is just weird, like if I'm joining a stabilized wood to a non-stabilized
Hmm.
wood, or a carbon fiber to a wood, or or mammoth to metal, because that's basically what it is when it's meeting the frame. It's a
Yeah, yeah,
joint.
yeah.
So, so anytime I have something weird like that where they have different rates of expansion and contraction,
Hmm.
I'll put a thin piece of material that can expand and
Right, right.
contract, and it basically acts like a little air ride for it,
Hmm.
so that it's less likely to crack it or delaminate from the
Right, right.
changes in temperature and humidity. So it has a thin leather spacer on either side, and then the ivory itself, and then that is joined through the tang and everything else
Hmm.
via a domed bronze pin.
Oh, okay.
So then that all goes together, and then it's a pretty basic sheath, but I did all that too. So I've been trying to learn a lot more about leatherwork. It's a
Yeah, yeah,
totally different level, but yeah, that's just kind of just took forever because of lots of fussy stuff, you know.
yeah, yeah. I'll link to a couple of pictures in the thread as well. Another one that I was looking up, I was researching some work by you, and the Van Helsing Bowie. That one really struck out at me. Could you tell us a little about that?
Sure. Yeah, that one was a kind of personal favorite. It started as a really annoying project.
Hmm.
I had a guy who wanted me to try and replicate a knife I had made for someone else before, and I didn't really want to do that, and he
Right.
wasn't very happy with it. Anyway, he was one of those customers that's not so fun to deal with.
Yeah, yeah.
But he ended up he didn't like about half an inch of the pattern
Hmm.
in the bottom edge of the blade when I sent him the picture
Right.
of the multi-bar blade. He didn't it wasn't quite as organized as he had wanted it to be.
Hmm.
So I had to make a whole new
Oh,
knife blade.
wow.
Um, so I had this very beautiful pattern in a knife blade that I now had no use for.
Hmm.
And it was near Halloween, and I've always loved Van Helsing and Dracula and all of that, and I thought, this could be a really cool Halloween themed knife.
Hmm.
So I just kind of let it run wild and um, just wanted to make it feel like an antique vampire hunter,
Right.
and so I had this beautiful piece of really dark walnut that was highly figured that kind of carved it so it would kind of loosely resemble almost like a Colt Pistols handles
Yeah.
profile, and then just have it be highly polished but still have a lot of character in
Hmm.
it. And then the guard was kind of cool because it was something I'd never done before, which I cast it out of shibuchi,
Hmm.
which I'm not sure if I've actually pronounced that right. It's Japanese, but it's basically it's an alloy of silver and copper. So
Okay.
this was about 30% pure silver to 70% copper, and then it's carved with files and chisels and
Hmm.
things like that. And so that it was a really fun knife. It was a really fat handle though. It was like a big blade, but it was fun. Yeah.
Really? Huh. Yeah, that's where it seems like a lot of projects I've got like the commission knives where you have to get directly to the customer's expectations, and then you can run away with a different knife on your own. It just feels like you're having fun.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's always the way it is. There are some projects that are just, like you said, for commissions that are just like a bear to get through. You just want it to be over. It's not
Hmm.
fun anymore. Thankfully, I only have a few like that. Most of my customers, they end up giving me more freedom, which is at least good. But yeah, there's nothing like just having a project that you can just run away with.
Yeah.
And that's how this was. So that it's a lot of fun.
With your learning experience, if let's say you forgot all your knowledge, let's say you were learning all again, what would you do differently in learning bladesmithing?
I would probably do it exactly the same way because I'm stubborn and pigheaded. But it took me 7 years ago. I assumed I would be making the knives that I'm just starting to make now.
So it's just slower advance than you'd think.
Yeah, well, yeah. Basically, it took me 5 years. It took me 5 years or so to learn all the things I didn't know,
Hmm.
to learn that I didn't know them, and then I was able to, and then just from that point on to now, it's been just a massive amount of learning, and
Right.
it's been very exciting, and a lot of that is through collaboration with other makers and all of those things. Like getting out there and getting to know other makers that are much better than yourself is always going to do way
Yeah.
more for you than just you sitting at home in most cases,
Yeah. Yeah.
there are a couple people that are prodigies that just never talk to anyone, but they're the exception. Um, but no, I mean, when I first started, I started with blacksmithing, which I think is something that more people should do because,
Hmm.
frankly, most bladesmiths' hammer work is pretty poor.
Yeah.
They it takes them forever to forge anything, and there are a lot more efficient ways that if you look at different blacksmithing techniques, it's much better. But I was lucky that I had a very good mentor and teacher in Jim Hoffman, who he specializes in the American colonial style of
Hmm.
ornamental ironwork.
Okay.
So everything from late 1700s to early 1800s. He makes cannon carriages and
Hmm.
hardware and just anything, pretty much
Right.
frying pans, all of it. So learning from him at first made it so that I became more efficient at all the metalworking side of it, which was really
Yeah.
helpful. But then a lot of modern knife making it, you also have to kind of almost be like a machinist
Hmm.
too.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that's the part that was really hard for me to learn. And then you also have to be a woodworker. So I was fortunate in knowing woodworkers and all that. So just getting out and knowing as many craftspeople as you can is really
Right.
helpful.
Yeah. So then you get the pretty much the mix from all the different arts, and you can use them more efficiently.
Yeah, and then when I started teaching at craft schools, getting to meet all of these other experts in every possible field, just like, it expands your horizon so much.
Right.
It's really cool.
And so, in your workshop, is there a particular part of knife making that you really like?
Yeah, I mean it varies because there are processes that just take long enough that you're excited at first and then you hate it by the end
Hmm.
and then you're excited for the next step. But honestly, my favorite thing to do right now is the final polishing and bringing out the hamon.
Hmm.
It
Yeah. Yeah.
it takes a few hours to properly like bring everything out, but it's really satisfying, peaceful, quiet work, and it's really nice.
Yeah. Okay. So, last question here. This is something that I've been interested in a while. But let's say a young bladesmith who's wanting to learn would come to you and wants to learn in your shop, become an apprentice. What would you want that person to be able to do for you so you could teach them in exchange?
Well, so yeah, that's a really good point. Most people approach apprenticeships with the idea of not really knowing what they want to do. They
Hmm.
just have this vague idea and they just assume they can come in and learn from people. Um, so it's really important that when someone comes in that they know exactly what they want to get
Hmm.
out of it and they tell you exactly what they're bringing. So whether that's free labor or it's you getting to sell whatever they were making and
Right.
then getting the majority of the profits or whatever. Um, I think most people aren't cut out for a traditional apprenticeship
Hmm.
nowadays because it's a full-time job. It's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
40-hour work week. And most smiths aren't willing to take on apprentices either because there's a minimum of 6 to 9 months where the person's next to useless,
Right. Yeah.
frankly.
Yeah.
And they're just costing you money. They're breaking your equipment, they're
Yeah. Hmm.
breaking your stuff. That's it. They're
Right.
good for sweeping the floor. So basically, if someone came to me that was really serious about it, um, I would approach it more like a mentorship program.
Yeah.
I would help them with certain projects and give them advice and get them
Hmm.
connected with other people. But and I had just as much help in that. And the people that helped me didn't ask for anything in return, and I wouldn't ask for anything in return,
Right.
other than maybe someone covering the cost of the materials for the project they're working on.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you know, I don't. I think with where the craft is and the way that the community is very helpful to
Right.
people that want to enter it and that people that are in it. And I think that it's really important to continue on with that idea of supporting each
Hmm.
other, and continuing to bring young and new people into the craft. Because I'm still young. I'm only
Yeah.
22. Um, so I'm just a kid. But it I got a ton of help. I'd be happy to give the same kind of help to someone who is serious about it.
Right.
Um, I've thrown a lot of people out for not being serious about it.
Hmm.
But yeah, if someone was serious about it, I wouldn't be too concerned about
Okay.
anything.
So the main point is, as long as the person interested is really serious, then you'll really help them more or less.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because most Smiths that are working full time, they barely have time to get their own work done. They don't really have
Hmm.
time to mess around with someone who's just gonna piddle about.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Well, awesome. Thank you. This has been really nice talking to you and a lot of help. So, thank you.
Yeah, great talking to you, Caleb.